Tonight, we are going to do something very simple with the worry that followed you to bed. We are not going to fight it. We are not going to explain it. We are not going to try to solve it. We are simply going to offer it a place to rest. There is nothing you need to fix tonight. Nothing you need to figure out before morning. Just listen. The rest will take care of itself. You know the feeling, I think. You lie down. The pillow is soft. The room is dark. And then, like a guest who arrives without knocking, the worry walks in. It sits at the edge of your mind and begins to speak. About tomorrow, about something you said, about something you forgot, about something that may never happen at all. And the more you try to push it away, the louder it becomes. Tonight, we are not pushing anything away. We are not closing any doors. We are simply going to sit with what is here, the way you might sit with an old friend who has come a long way and has nowhere else to go. You do not need to agree with everything they say. You only need to let them be. And sometimes, if you sit with them long enough without arguing, they grow quiet on their own. Not because you won, but because they were never looking for a fight. They were looking for someone to listen. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are, and where you are listening from. It is always a comfort to know that someone else is lying in the dark right now, somewhere across the world, listening to the same words. The stories and reflections you will hear tonight are drawn from the ancient wisdom of Zen and Buddhist teachings. Teachings that have helped people rest a little easier for over 2,500 years. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what is offered here. You do not need to believe anything. You do not need to practice anything. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. They are simply stories, invitations to rest. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember. If you fall asleep halfway through, that is not failure. That is the whole point. If this path of quiet stories calls to something in you, you are welcome to subscribe and return to this space whenever you need a slower night. So, settle in now. Let your body grow heavy against whatever is holding you. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the air fill your chest, and then let it go without hurrying. There is nowhere to be but here. There is nothing to do but listen. And if your mind begins to wander, as minds do, that is fine. Let it wander. It will find its way back. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Tonight begins with a question you already know the answer to. You have known it for a long time, perhaps longer than you realize. It is the question that every person who has ever lain awake at 2 in the morning has asked themselves, even if they never said it out loud. Why does the mind keep going when the body has already stopped? There is no lecture waiting for you on the other side of that question. Only a story. And it begins in a small workshop beside a river on a morning when the autumn light was just beginning to change. The workshop belonged to a woman who made clothes. She had been making them for more than 20 years. Stitching seams, cutting patterns, fitting fabric to the shape of someone else's life. Her workshop sat at the edge of the water, where the river bent slowly before heading south. And on quiet mornings, she could hear the current moving beneath the wooden floor. The sound was so familiar to her that she no longer noticed it, the way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. The room smelled of cotton and chalk dust. Rolls of fabric leaned against the walls in soft columns, some pale, some dark, some patterned with flowers she would never wear herself. Her cutting table was wide and scarred from years of use. The surface cool to the touch in the early hours before the sun had climbed high enough to warm the room. Her hands were rough, the kind of roughness that comes not from carelessness, but from care. from pulling thread through cloth 10,000 times, until the fingers remember the motion, even when the mind has wandered elsewhere. Some mornings, she would press a cup of tea against her palms before starting work, feeling the warmth seep into the joints that had grown stiff overnight. The tea was always the same: dark, unsweetened, slightly bitter, and she drank it without tasting it, the way you do when your mind is already 3 tasks ahead of your body. She arrived before dawn most mornings. She liked the silence of the workshop before the day began, when the scissors were still, and the iron was cold, and the only company was the sound of the river. It was the one time of day when she felt almost calm, because even in those quiet moments, the worry was there. It sat beside her like a second shadow. She would pick up a finished garment and check the seams. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. She would hold it up to the light and look for flaws she knew were not there. She would fold it, set it down, then pick it up again. The dress was finished, but her mind was not. At night, it was worse. She would lie in bed and replay every stitch she had made that day. She would count the orders she had not yet started. She would imagine a customer returning with a torn hem, a crooked collar, a button that came loose. None of these things had happened, but in the dark, they felt as real as the pillow beneath her head. One morning, an old woman came to collect a coat. She was a neighbor, someone who had been coming to the workshop for years, always with the same unhurried pace, the same quiet way of standing in the doorway, as if she had all the time in the world. The seamstress handed her the coat. It was well made. The lining was smooth, the buttons secure, the collar sat exactly where it should. But even as the old woman held it in her hands, the seamstress was already speaking. "I am not sure about the left pocket," she said. "The stitching might be slightly uneven. I could take it back and redo it. It would only take an hour." The old woman looked at the pocket. She turned the coat over, then back again. She put it on. It fit perfectly. "The pocket is fine," she said. "But what if it comes apart?" The old woman smiled, not with amusement, but with something closer to recognition. She had seen this before, not in the coat, in the woman. "Let me ask you something," she said. "When you finish a dress, do you keep sewing?" The seamstress paused. "Of course not. Then why do you keep worrying about it after it is done?" "Worry is just another kind of stitching, dear. You are sewing into cloth that is already whole. Every extra stitch does not make it stronger. It only makes your hands tired." The seamstress did not answer right away. She looked down at her hands. The rough fingers, the small calluses, the faint tremor that appeared when she held them still too long. "But what if they notice something I missed?" she said quietly. The old woman tilted her head. "Have they ever?" The seamstress thought for a long moment. "No," she admitted. "No one has ever brought anything back, and yet you have already unmade this coat in your mind 12 times since yesterday. You have pulled every seam apart and re-sewn it in the dark, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I can see it in your eyes. You did not sleep last night." The seamstress said nothing, but her silence was an answer. The old woman buttoned the coat and turned toward the door. Then she stopped. "You worry for the coat," she said gently, "but who worries for you?" The door closed softly behind her. The workshop was quiet again. The river moved beneath the floor, steady and unhurried, the way it had been moving since long before the workshop was built. And for the first time that morning, the seamstress did not pick up the next piece of fabric. She did not reach for the scissors. She did not check the order list pinned to the wall. She sat down by the window, in the old wooden chair she never used because sitting still had always felt like wasting time. The autumn light came through the glass at a low angle and fell across her open hands. She looked at them, really looked, and saw not the flaws she usually saw, but the years, the patience, the thousands of garments that had passed through those fingers and gone out into the world, keeping someone warm. She did not check anything. She did not count anything. She just sat, and for a few breaths, the silence was not empty. It was full of all the things she had been too busy worrying about to notice. Tonight, if you are lying here with a mind that keeps checking, keeps reviewing, keeps running through the list one more time, you are not broken. You are not weak. You are simply doing what minds do. They stitch, they check. They go over the seams again and again, looking for the flaw that will explain the unease. But the unease is not in the seams. It never was. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Zen teacher, once offered a gentle observation. He said that worrying does not accomplish anything, that even if you worry 20 times more, it will not change the situation. Your anxiety will only make things worse. He did not say this to scold. He said it the way a doctor might say, you are holding your breath, not as a judgment, as a noticing. And perhaps tonight, that is all that is needed. Not to stop the worry, just to notice it, to see it sitting there, stitching into cloth that is already whole, and to set the needle down, not forever, just for now. There is another story I would like to share with you. It takes us somewhere colder, somewhere higher, to a place where the wind sounds different, and the night lasts a little longer. In a monastery on a mountain, where the winters came early and stayed late, there lived a young monk who had not yet learned to sit still. He was earnest, devoted, the kind of person who arrived first to every morning chanting and swept the courtyard without being asked. But his mind was a different matter entirely. It moved the way a bird moves in a cage, hopping from perch to perch, never settling, always looking for the next place to land. The monastery was old. Its walls were thick stone, darkened by centuries of wood smoke and rain. In summer, the stone stayed cool and the hallways felt like caves. But in winter, the cold pressed inward from every direction. Through the gaps beneath the doors, through the cracks in the window frames, through the stone itself, which seemed to remember every frost it had ever held. The only warmth came from a large iron stove that sat in the center of the main hall. The stove burned through the night, fed by split logs that the monks stacked in careful rows along the back wall. The smell of burning pine was so constant that it had become part of the building itself. You could smell it in the robes, in the meditation cushions, in the wooden beams overhead. On the coldest nights, the young monk could taste the smoke at the back of his throat, dry and faintly sweet, and feel the difference between the side of his body that faced the stove and the side that faced the dark hallway, one warm, one cold, as if he were two people sitting in the same place. One evening, the head monk called the young man aside and gave him a task. Tonight, he said, you will tend the fire. Keep it burning until morning. The hall must stay warm. It was a simple task. Others had done it before. But the young monk received it as if he had been asked to guard something precious. And in a way, he had. The fire was the only thing standing between the monastery and the mountain cold. He began his watch at sundown. The stove was full, the flames steady. He sat on a low wooden bench beside it and watched the coals glow through the iron grate. The heat pressed gently against his face. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the wooden shutters, pushing cold air through the gaps beneath the doors. Within an hour, the worry began. What if the fire goes out? What if I fall asleep? What if the wood is damp and will not catch? He stood and added a log, then another. The flames leaped higher. He sat back down, but now the fire was too large. The iron glowed red. He opened the grate and pulled a log out with the tongs, burning his fingers slightly. He set the log aside. Now there was not enough. He put another log in. Too much again. By midnight, he had added and removed wood so many times that the floor around the stove was scattered with half-burned logs and ash. His hands were black. His robes smelled of smoke. And the fire burned exactly as it always had. It did not need his worry. It never had. It was then that the old monk appeared. He did not announce himself. He simply materialized in the doorway, the way old monks sometimes do, as if they had been standing there all along and you had only just noticed. He looked at the scattered logs. He looked at the young monk's hands. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he sat down on the bench beside him. "You have been busy," he said. "I was trying to keep it right, not too much, not too little." The old monk nodded slowly. "And how is the fire?" The young monk looked at the stove. The flames were steady. The coals were glowing. The hall was warm. "It is fine," he said, surprised. "It was always fine," the old monk said. "The fire does not need you to worry about it. It only needs you to be here." The young monk opened his mouth to respond, but the old monk held up a hand. Shunryu Suzuki once said that most of our problems are not actual problems. They are something created by our own views, our own way of looking. The fire is not struggling. You are struggling with the fire. Do you see the difference? The young monk looked at the stove again. The flames moved the way flames always move, without hesitation, without second guessing, without checking whether they were doing it right. "So what do I do?" the young monk asked. "What are you doing right now?" "Sitting, talking to you." "And is the fire burning?" The young monk glanced at the stove. "Yes." "Did you do anything to it just now?" "No." The old monk let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, very gently, "You were doing nothing, and the fire was fine. Perhaps doing nothing is not the problem you think it is." The young monk felt something shift inside his chest. Not a thought exactly, but a loosening, like a knot that had been pulled too tight for too long. The old monk smiled. "You sit, you stay, you let the fire be the fire. And if it needs a log, you will know. Not because you are watching for it, because you are here." The old monk stood, bowed slightly, and disappeared back into the dark hallway. The cold air followed him for a moment, then settled. The young monk sat back down on the bench. This time, he did not reach for the tongs. He did not count the logs. He placed his hands on his knees, palms down, and let the warmth of the stove press against his face. The coals shifted and settled with a soft sound, like a sigh. The wind outside continued its work against the shutters, but it sounded different now. Not like a threat, but like weather, just weather. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped. The tension that had been living in his jaw since sundown released without announcement. The way snow slides from a branch. Not because anything pushed it, but because it was time. Outside, the mountain was still there, vast and dark and indifferent to his worry. The stars were still there, doing what stars do, and the fire burned on, steady and unhurried, the way it had been burning long before he sat down, and the way it would continue to burn long after his eyes finally closed. The last thing he heard before sleep took him was the sound of the coals settling. A soft, almost musical sound, like the monastery breathing. There is a way that rivers move at night that is different from how they move during the day. In daylight, you can see the current, the ripples, the eddies, the places where the water quickens over shallow stones. But at night, the river becomes a sound, just a sound, a long continuous murmur that asks nothing of you and expects nothing in return. A river does not worry about the sea. It does not calculate how far it has left to go, or whether the path ahead will narrow or widen. It does not stop at a bend and wonder if it has taken a wrong turn. It simply moves through stone, through sand, through the roots of trees, that have been drinking from it for 100 years. It moves because that is what rivers do. If you stood beside a river at night, you would hear it before you saw it. A low, steady murmur, like someone humming in another room. The moonlight would catch the surface in silver fragments, and the air would smell of wet earth and stone. You would feel the coolness rising from the water, settling on your skin like a second layer of quiet. And when it finally reaches the sea, if you could ask it, it would not say it arrived. It would say it remembered. It remembered that it was always the sea. The river was just the sea, taking the long way home. Perhaps tonight, your worry is like that river. It feels like it is going somewhere, carrying something important, rushing toward a destination it cannot name. But what if it is not going anywhere? What if it is simply moving because that is what it does? And what if the place it is trying to reach is already here? In this room, in this breath, in this moment where you are lying still and the night is holding you. The Buddha had a word for this, for the restlessness and worry that keeps the mind from settling. He called it uddaka kukuka. It is one of 5 veils, 5 curtains that fall across the mind and prevent us from seeing clearly. He described it like this. Imagine a pot of water stirred by the wind. The surface is choppy, broken, constantly moving. And because of that movement, you cannot see your own reflection. The water is not dirty. It is not broken. It is simply disturbed. And all it needs, all it has ever needed, is for the wind to stop. Tonight you do not need to stop the wind. You do not need to force the water to be still. You only need to stop stirring, to let your hands rest, to let the surface settle on its own. And if you notice your breath right now, just this breath, just this one, you are already doing what the young monk learned beside the fire. You are not adding wood. You are not taking it away. You are simply here. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Perhaps you have noticed that your body has already begun to settle without you asking it to. Perhaps the grip in your stomach has loosened, or the tightness behind your eyes has softened. This is not something you are doing. This is something your body remembers when the mind stops telling it what to feel. It remembers how to rest. It has always known. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky, and that conscious breathing is the anchor. Not thinking, not solving, breathing, the kind of breathing you are doing right now without even trying. The kind that happens when you stop telling the body what to do and let it remember on its own. And perhaps that is enough for now. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you. Notice what has begun to soften since we started this journey. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else that worry often carries with it. A heaviness, a weight that we did not ask for, but somehow picked up along the way. And the next story begins with a man who kept everything he had ever been given, and a workshop that had long since run out of room. In a workshop at the edge of a forest, there lived a man who built things out of wood. He had been building for more than 30 years. Tables, chairs, shelves, doors, window frames, toys for children who had long since grown up. His hands knew the grain of every kind of wood, the way a musician knows the strings of an instrument. Oak was stubborn but honest. Pine was soft and forgiving. Walnut was dark and patient, the kind of wood that rewarded you for taking your time. The workshop itself was a small building with a slanted roof and a wide door that faced west, so that in the late afternoons the sunlight came in at a low angle and turned the sawdust in the air into something golden. You could see it floating there, suspended, catching the light like tiny embers that had forgotten how to fall. The smell was the first thing you noticed when you stepped inside. Fresh sawdust, warm and sweet, layered over the deeper scent of pine resin and old varnish. It was the kind of smell that settled into your clothes and stayed with you long after you left. But if the smell was the first thing you noticed, the second was the clutter. Every surface in the workshop was covered. Offcuts of wood leaned against the walls in unsteady towers. Planks that had been cut for projects never started lay across the workbenches. Scraps no larger than a hand were stacked in boxes, and the boxes were stacked on top of each other until they reached the ceiling beams. There was barely enough room to walk from the door to the lathe, and the workbench, where the actual building was supposed to happen, had not been clear in years. The carpenter knew this. He saw it every morning when he unlocked the door. He felt it in the way he had to turn sideways to reach his tools, in the way his elbow knocked against a pile of oak scraps every time he reached for the plane. But he could not bring himself to clear it, because every piece of wood in that workshop was attached to something. This one was left over from the table he built for his wife the year they married. That one came from the bookshelf he made for his daughter's first apartment. These thin strips were from a birdhouse his grandson had helped him sand. Small hands holding sandpaper, sawdust on a small nose. To throw any of it away felt like throwing away the memory itself. So he kept it all, and the workshop grew smaller, and the space for making new things grew smaller with it. Until one day he realized he had not built anything new in over a year. There was simply no room. It was his granddaughter who said it. She was visiting on a spring afternoon, standing in the doorway, because there was not enough space for her to come fully inside. She looked around, at the towers of wood, at the cluttered benches, at her grandfather, standing in the narrow clearing in the center of it all like a man on a small island. "What are all these pieces for?" she asked. "Different things," he said. "Some of them are from projects I finished. Some are for projects I might start." She picked up a small piece of walnut from the nearest pile. It was smooth, dark, no bigger than her palm. She turned it over. "This one is beautiful," she said. "What is it from?" He looked at it for a long moment. "That was from a jewelry box I made for your grandmother," he said quietly. 20 years ago." She set it down gently. "And you have been carrying it since then?" He did not answer. "Grandfather," she said, and her voice was kind, not impatient, not lecturing, just honest. "Do you not get tired carrying all of this?" Thich Nhat Hanh, the beloved Zen teacher, once made an observation that cuts very close to the bone. He said that people have a hard time letting go of their suffering, that out of a fear of the unknown, they prefer suffering that is familiar. It is a strange thing to hear at first. Why would anyone choose to suffer? But the carpenter understood it without needing it explained. The weight of all those scraps was heavy, but it was a weight he knew, and the emptiness that might follow if he let them go. That was a weight he had never tested. What if it was worse? He stood there for a long time after his granddaughter left. The afternoon light shifted, the sawdust settled. The forest outside the workshop made its late-day sounds. A woodpecker somewhere, the creak of branches, the wind moving through leaves that were still new and pale green. Then he did something very small. He picked up one piece of wood, not the walnut from the jewelry box, not anything with a story, just a scrap, a nameless offcut no bigger than his thumb. He carried it to the door and set it down on the step outside. He did not throw it away. He did not say goodbye to it. He simply set it down. The workshop was still full. Nothing had really changed, but his hands felt lighter, just a little, just enough to notice. He stood in the doorway and looked at the scrap on the step, lit by the last of the afternoon sun. It looked like nothing, It looked like everything. It looked like the smallest possible beginning. What the carpenter was beginning to discover, without knowing the word for it, is something the Buddha spoke about with great tenderness. He called it upadana, and the word itself tells the story. It is usually translated as clinging or grasping, but the original meaning is closer to fuel. Upadana is the fuel that keeps the fire of suffering burning, not the fire itself, the fuel, the things we feed it, the scraps we keep, the old wood we stack against the walls of our minds, because we are afraid that without it, we will have nothing left to burn. Thich Nhat Hanh once said that letting go gives us freedom, and that freedom is the only condition for happiness. Not wealth, not certainty, not control, freedom. And freedom begins, not with a grand gesture of release, but with setting one small thing down on the step and noticing that your hands are lighter. There is a side of clinging that we do not often talk about, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. We tend to think of clinging as greed, as wanting too much, holding too tight, but more often than not, clinging is not greed at all. It is fear. We hold on because we are afraid that if we let go, there will be nothing left, that the empty space will be too quiet, that without the weight, we will not know who we are. But consider this. A hand that is clenched around something cannot receive anything new. It is full, yes, but it is also closed. The fingers are locked, the palm is hidden, and the thing it holds so tightly is being crushed by the very grip that was meant to protect it. Letting go is not losing. It is opening. It is making room. It is trusting that the empty hand is not empty at all. It is available. Dogen, the great Zen master, wrote something that has stayed with many people across the centuries. He said that to start from the self and try to understand all things is delusion, but to let the self be awakened by all things is enlightenment. Perhaps letting go is not something we do. Perhaps it is something we allow. We stop gripping, and the world rushes in to fill the space we have made. There is another story that comes to mind, one that takes us from the sawdust and the forest to a garden where the morning is just beginning, and the dew is still on the leaves. In a monastery where the days were measured not by clocks, but by bells, there was a nun who had been given charge of the garden. She was not old, not young, somewhere in the middle years, the years when you have learned enough to be careful, but not yet enough to be free. She had been at the monastery for a decade, and in that time she had earned a reputation for diligence, for thoroughness, for never leaving a task half done. The garden was larger than it needed to be for the small community it fed. There were rows of vegetables, beds of herbs, a section for medicinal plants, and along the eastern wall, a border of flowers that the head nun had planted years ago, and that bloomed in waves from spring through autumn. The soil was dark and rich, the kind that held moisture well and smelled of rain, even when it had not rained in days. Each morning, the nun knelt in the garden before the first bell. She could feel the earth through the thin fabric of her robe, cool and damp, slightly gritty, alive in a way that nothing else in the monastery felt alive. The dew clung to the leaves of the basil and the mint, and when she brushed against them, the scent rose up around her, sharp, green, immediate. Somewhere in the plum tree, a bird was singing the same 3 notes over and over, and the bees had already begun their slow, purposeful circuits between the lavender and the jasmine. Her task that season was to weed. The spring rains had been generous, and the garden had responded with equal generosity. Not just the vegetables and the herbs, but the clover, the dandelions, the creeping grass that threaded itself between the rows. Everything was growing. Everything wanted to stay. And that was the problem. because the nun could not bring herself to pull anything out. Every time she reached for a weed, a thought stopped her. What if this is not a weed? What if it has a purpose I do not see? What if I pull out something that was supposed to be here? So she left them. She left the clover and the dandelions and the creeping grass. She left the nameless plants that sprouted between the stones. And slowly, the garden began to blur. The borders between the beds disappeared. The herbs were choked. The flowers could not find the light. It was the head nun who came to look. She was a woman of few words and many years. The kind of person whose silence felt like a teaching. She walked through the garden without speaking, touching a leaf here, bending to examine a root there. Then she turned to the younger woman. "You have not been weeding," she said. It was not a question. "I was not sure what to pull," the nun said. "I did not want to make a mistake." The head nun knelt beside her. She reached into the soil and pulled up a strand of creeping grass with one smooth motion. The roots came away clean, trailing dark earth. "You are afraid of pulling the wrong thing," she said, "so you pull nothing. But not choosing is also a choice, and it is one that lets the weeds choose for you." "But what if I pull something that was meant to grow?" The head nun smiled. "Then it will grow back. That is what living things do. But the things that are being smothered right now," she gestured toward the jasmine, barely visible beneath a tangle of clover, "those will not wait for you to decide." She placed the grass on the path beside them. Then she said something the younger nun would remember for the rest of her life. The garden does not fear loss. It knows that next season will bring more than this one. The only one who fears loss is the gardener. Dogen once wrote that when you let go, the Dharma fills your hands. The younger nun did not know this quote, but she understood it that morning, kneeling in the wet earth with dirt beneath her fingernails, and the smell of jasmine finally reaching her. Freed from the tangle that had been hiding it, she began to weed, slowly, one plant at a time. Each time she pulled something up, a small space opened in the soil, dark, damp, breathing. She expected to feel loss. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. Each space she cleared was not an absence. It was a possibility. By the time the morning bell rang, the eastern border was clean. The jasmine stood upright in the new light, its white petals catching the early sun. The basil had room to spread. A small beetle crawled across the freshly turned earth, moving with the unhurried confidence of something that knows exactly where it belongs. And the nun sat back on her heels in the middle of the garden, her hands dark with soil, her knees damp from the earth, and looked at the spaces she had made. She could smell the jasmine now. Really smell it, for the first time in weeks. It had been there all along, blooming quietly beneath the tangle, waiting for room to breathe. The spaces were the most beautiful parts of the garden, not because they were empty, because they were open. There is an old Zen story. You may have heard a version of it, told differently, in another time. Two monks were walking along a road that led through the countryside. They came to a stream where the water was high from recent rain, and the current was strong enough to make the crossing difficult. An elderly stranger stood at the bank, looking at the water. She was frail, leaning on a stick, and it was clear that she could not cross alone. The older monk did not hesitate. He walked over, lifted her gently onto his back, and carried her across the stream. The water came up to his waist. His robes were soaked. When they reached the other side, he set her down on the dry bank, bowed once, and continued walking. The younger monk followed in silence. But the silence was not peace. It was the silence of a man swallowing words he wanted very much to say. They walked for an hour, 2 hours. The afternoon wore on. The road climbed a low hill and descended again. Finally, As the sun was beginning to lower, the younger monk could no longer hold it in. "We are not supposed to carry strangers," he said. "It is against our practice. You should not have touched her." The older monk kept walking for a few more steps. Then he stopped and turned around. "I set her down at the stream," he said quietly. "That was this morning. You have been carrying her all day." The younger monk opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his own hands, empty, clean, dry, and realized that they did not feel empty at all. They felt full, full of a weight that had no shape, no name, and no reason to still be there, except that he had not yet chosen to put it down. The stream was miles behind them now. The stranger was long gone, probably home, probably warm, probably not thinking about either of them. And yet here he was, still standing at the water's edge in his mind, still holding on. Tonight, as you lie here, you might notice that you are carrying something too. Not in your arms, not in your pockets, somewhere deeper, in the chest maybe, or in the space between your shoulders, or in that place behind your eyes where the thinking lives. You do not need to name it. You do not need to understand why it is there, or when it arrived, or whose fault it is that you are holding it. You only need to know that you are allowed to set it down, not forever, not for anyone else, just for tonight. Perhaps you can feel it right now, the weight. It might be something someone said to you today. It might be something you said to yourself. It might be an old worry you have been carrying so long that you forgot it was there. The way you forget you are wearing a coat until someone asks why you are sweating. The Buddha had a word for this kind of holding. He called it upadana, and the word means fuel, not the fire, the fuel, the things we feed the fire with, the old wood, the dry scraps, the memories and projections and what-ifs that keep the flame alive. When you stop feeding it, the fire does not need to be fought. It simply grows smaller. It breathes. It settles into coals. And coals, as the young monk learned last night, do not need your worry. They only need you to be here. So, tonight if you can, let your hands open. Not all the way, just a little. Just enough to feel the air against your palms. You do not need to drop everything you are carrying. Just loosen the grip. Just enough to remember that your hands were not made for holding. They were made for touching, for reaching, for resting, open, on the blanket beside you. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a truth that worry tries very hard to hide from us. It is the truth that everything, including the worry itself, is passing. It does not feel that way tonight. It may not feel that way tomorrow. But there is a word for it, and there are stories that carry it gently, and we will sit with them next. There is a truth that worry tries very hard to hide from us. It whispers that the hard thing will last forever, that the knot in your chest will never loosen, that the problem waiting for you in the morning will still be exactly the same size when you wake up. But here is the thing. Worry does not want you to know everything passes. Not just the good things, not just the beautiful things. Everything, including the worry itself. And tonight, we are going to sit with that truth, not as a threat, but as the gentlest news you have heard all day. It begins in a small market by the sea, on a morning when the flowers were still wet. She had been selling flowers since she was old enough to carry a bucket. Her mother had done it before her, and her grandmother before that. 3 generations of women who rose before the sun to cut stems, strip leaves, and arrange color into something worth stopping for. The market was a simple place. A row of wooden stalls along a road that ran parallel to the shore, close enough that the salt air mixed with everything. You could taste it on your lips if you stood still long enough. You could smell it beneath the flowers, beneath the lilies and the chrysanthemums and the wild daisies that grew along the cliffs. A deeper scent, mineral and old, the smell of the sea, doing what it has always done. Her stall was the third from the end. The awning was faded canvas, once blue, now the color of a sky that has been washed too many times. Beneath it, she arranged the day's flowers in glass jars and tin buckets, grouping them by color the way her mother had taught her. Whites together, purples together, yellows at the edge, where the light would catch them first. By mid-morning, the stall was a small explosion of color against the grey stone of the market wall. Bees found it. Children found it. Old women with shopping bags paused and leaned in, breathing deeply, as if the flowers were offering something the rest of the market could not. On the hottest days, she would eat her lunch, sitting on the stool behind the stall. Bread and cheese, and a piece of fruit that tasted like the season. Sweet and overripe, and impossible to save for tomorrow. The juice ran down her wrist and she wiped it on her apron without thinking. The way you do when your hands are always busy, and there is never a clean moment to stop. But by afternoon, the heat did its work. The petals that had been firm and bright at dawn began to soften. The whites turned translucent. The purples darkened at the edges. The stems, once straight, curved downward under the weight of blooms that were already beginning to let go. She could feel it in her hands when she touched them, the difference between a flower that was arriving and one that was leaving. The morning flower pushed back against her fingers. The afternoon flower yielded, as if it had already decided. This was the part of the day she hated. Not the waking early, not the carrying, not the standing in heat, but this. Watching the work undo itself. Every morning she began with something beautiful, and every afternoon she ended with a bucket of wilting stems and fallen petals. It felt, some days, like building a sandcastle at the edge of the tide. There was a woman who came to the stall every week. She was old. How old, the flower seller could not guess, with hands that moved slowly and eyes that moved even slower, as if they had learned long ago that most things are worth looking at twice. She always bought the same thing, 3 white chrysanthemums, wrapped in brown paper. She never haggled, she never hurried. One afternoon she arrived later than usual. The chrysanthemums were past their best, petals browning at the tips, stems soft. The flower seller held them up apologetically. "These are all I have left," she said. "They were beautiful this morning. I am sorry." The old woman took them without hesitating. She held them close and looked at them the way you might look at a sleeping child. Not with pity, but with recognition. "You seem sad," the old woman said. The flower seller shrugged. "It is always the same. I wake up, I cut flowers. They are perfect. By afternoon they are dying. Tomorrow I do it again. Sometimes I wonder what the point is." The old woman turned a chrysanthemum, slowly, in her fingers. The petals were beginning to curl inward, as if the flower were closing its hands. "You think the flower has failed because it is fading," she said. "But it has not failed. It has finished. There is a difference. But it was so beautiful this morning, and it is beautiful now. Just differently. The morning beauty says, 'Look at me.' The afternoon beauty says, 'I gave you everything I had.' Which one do you think takes more courage?" The flower seller did not answer. The old woman wrapped the chrysanthemums in the brown paper herself, tucking the stems in carefully, the way you tuck a blanket around someone who is cold. Dogen, one of the great Zen masters, once wrote that one must be deeply aware of the impermanence of the world. He did not say this to frighten anyone. He said it the way a gardener might say it will rain tomorrow. Not as a warning, but as a fact so obvious that the only mistake is pretending it is not true. "The flower does not promise to stay," the old woman said, turning to leave. "It only promises to bloom. And it has kept its promise. every single time. That afternoon, the flower seller did not throw the wilting flowers into the compost bin the way she usually did. Quickly, without looking, as if disposing of evidence. Instead, she left them on the stall. She sat on her wooden stool and looked at them. The chrysanthemums, with their curling petals, the daisies leaning sideways, the single lily, whose white had gone the color of old cream. She had never looked at them like this before. She had always seen dying. But now, sitting still in the late afternoon light, with the sound of the sea behind her, and the smell of salt and pollen in the air, she saw something else. She saw completion. Each flower had opened as far as it could open. Each one had given its color, its scent, its particular shape to the day. And now it was resting, not failing, resting, the way anything rests after it has done what it came to do. A single petal detached from the chrysanthemum and landed softly on the wooden surface of the stall. The light caught it, thin, almost translucent, the edge brown, the center still holding a ghost of white. She left it there. It looked like a small, quiet sentence at the end of a very long story. We live as if things should last, as if the good feelings should stay permanently, as if the people we love should never change, as if the body should remain exactly as it was at 25. We live as if permanence is the natural state of things, and impermanence is the interruption. But Shunryu Suzuki, with the kind of directness that only a Zen teacher can manage, said it plainly. Without accepting the fact that everything changes, we cannot find perfect composure. Not happiness, composure. The steadiness that comes from no longer fighting what is already true. And what is true tonight is this: the thing you are worrying about is changing, right now. Even as you lie here, it is not the same worry it was an hour ago. It may wear the same name. It may sit in the same place in your chest, but it has shifted. It always shifts, because that is what everything does. There was a man in a village on a hill who made pots and bowls and vases out of clay. He had been doing it for 20 years, longer than some of his neighbors had been alive. His hands knew the wheel the way a river knows its bed, by feel, by memory, by the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 turns. The workshop sat at the crest of the hill, and from the doorway you could see the valley spread out below. Terraced fields, a thin river, smoke rising from distant rooftops in the early mornings. The kiln was behind the workshop, a squat brick structure with an arched mouth that glowed orange during firings. On firing nights, the potter stayed up past midnight, feeding wood into the kiln's belly, watching the temperature by the color of the flame. Yellow was too cool, white was too hot, and in between was a shade of orange that had no name, but that he recognized the way you recognize a familiar face in a crowd. The heat pushed outward in waves, pressing against his skin, drying his lips, making the cool night air behind him feel like another country. The smell was elemental, earth and fire, minerals releasing their moisture, clay becoming stone. Crickets sang in the grass beyond the kiln, indifferent to the transformation happening inside. On some nights, when the wind shifted, he could taste the smoke, dry and faintly metallic, the taste of stone being born from mud. His wife would bring him tea at midnight, and he would hold the cup in both hands and feel the two kinds of warmth. The fierce heat from the kiln on his face, and the small, human warmth of the tea against his palms. And think that this was the closest he would ever come to understanding what it means to make something from nothing. He had been working on a vase for more than a month. It was the largest piece he had ever attempted. Tall, slender, with a neck that curved outward like the bell of a trumpet flower. He had thrown it 3 times before getting the proportions right. He had smoothed it by hand over the course of a week, turning it slowly on the wheel, pressing his thumb into the clay until the surface was as even as water. He had glazed it with a mixture he had spent years perfecting, a deep blue-green that reminded him of the river in winter. He placed it in the kiln at dusk. By midnight, the firing was complete. He let the kiln cool until dawn, then opened it with the careful hands of a man unwrapping something fragile. The vase was cracked. A single line ran from the rim down through the body, thin as a hair, but unmistakable. He could feel it with his fingertip. A ridge where the surface had split, the clay on either side pulling apart like two halves of a broken conversation. He sat down on the ground beside the kiln, holding the vase in his lap. The morning was cool. The valley below was filling with mist. He felt something collapse inside his chest, the way a wall collapses. Not all at once, but in stages, brick by brick. A month, he said to no one. Gone. It was his wife who found him there. She had come to bring tea. The same dark tea she brought every firing morning, in the same cracked cup she had been using for years. She did not say anything at first. She sat down beside him and poured 2 cups. The steam rose between them, thin and pale against the cool air. Then she saw the vase. She reached for it. He let her take it. She turned it slowly, the way the old woman at the market had turned the chrysanthemum, not looking for the flaw, but looking at the whole. It is cracked, he said. Yes, a month of work. She ran her finger along the crack, gently, the way you might trace a line on a map. Do you know what I see? She said. I see a vase that went through fire. That is what the crack means. It means it was real. It went in. It came through. And it did not come through unchanged, because nothing does. She set it on the ground between them. In the early light, the crack caught the sun, a thin, bright line running down the blue-green glaze, almost like a vein of gold. The crack does not ruin the vase, she said. It finishes the story. Every beautiful thing carries the mark of time. If it did not, it would only be pretending. Dogen once wrote that our lives are as brief as a dewdrop on the morning grass, as fleeting as a flash of lightning. He was not being morbid. He was being precise. And in that precision, there is a strange comfort. If everything is brief, the joy, the sorrow, the vase, the crack, then nothing needs to be permanent to be meaningful. It only needs to be real. The potter looked at the vase for a long time. Then he picked up his tea, from the cracked cup his wife had been using for years, and drank. It tasted the same as it always did. The crack had never changed the flavor. He had just never thought about it before. He placed the vase on the shelf inside the workshop, beside the others. He did not hide the crack. He did not turn it to the wall. He let it face outward, where the light from the doorway would find it every morning, and draw that thin, bright line down its side, reminding him not of failure, but of fire. If you have ever stood beside a stream in winter, a stream high in the mountains, where the cold comes early and stays long, you know what happens to moving water when the temperature drops far enough. The surface freezes. A thin sheet of ice forms first at the edges, where the current is slowest, then creeps inward until the whole stream is covered in a pale, opaque skin. The air above it smells different, sharper, cleaner, the way cold air always smells when there is ice nearby. The trees along the bank stand bare, their branches dark against the white sky, holding their shapes the way a drawing holds its lines. From above, it looks like the water has stopped. It looks like nothing is happening. It looks like stillness. But if you kneel down, if you press your cheek against the cold surface and close your eyes, you will hear it. Beneath the frozen surface, the water is still moving, not quickly, slowly, carefully, feeling its way through the dark, but moving. It has not stopped. It has only gone somewhere you cannot see. Worry can feel like that frozen surface. It feels solid, permanent, unyielding. As if the hard thing will be hard forever. As if the knot will never loosen. But beneath it, something is always shifting. The stream does not wait for permission to thaw. It does not need you to break the ice. It only needs time. And time, as you already know, is the one thing that never stops moving. Spring always comes. Not because someone wills it. Not because someone earns it. Because that is what seasons do. They turn. And the ice, which felt so permanent, so final, becomes water again. The same water it always was, flowing toward the same sea. The worry you are carrying tonight is not the same worry you carried an hour ago. It may wear the same clothes. It may sit in the same chair. But it has changed. Your body knows this even if your mind does not. Notice how different you feel now compared to when you first lay down. Something has shifted. In your shoulders, in your breath, in the space behind your eyes. You did not make it happen. It happened because everything moves. Even rest is a kind of movement. Even stillness is a kind of change. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it anicca, impermanence. But the word means more than things ending. It means things are changing right now. This breath is not the last breath. It is not even the same as the breath before it. Each one arrives new, stays for a moment, and leaves without asking. And each one is complete. Dogen wrote that a flower falls, even though we love it, and a weed grows even though we do not love it. He was not being cruel. He was being honest. And in that honesty, in the willingness to see things as they are, rather than as we wish they were, there is a kind of peace that does not depend on anything staying the same. Tonight, you do not need anything to stay the same. You do not need the worry to disappear. You only need to know that it is moving, that it is already different from what it was, that the stream beneath the ice has never stopped, and perhaps that is enough for now. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a breath. Feel the weight of your body pressing gently into whatever is holding you. Notice what has softened. When you are ready, we will continue together. Sometimes the hardest part is not the worry itself. It is the waiting. Waiting for an answer that has not yet come. Waiting for a morning that feels very far away. And the next story begins with a man who stood in a dry field and looked up at an empty sky, hoping for rain. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes not from doing too much, but from waiting too long. You know it, I think. It is the tiredness of lying in the dark, wondering if the phone will ring. The tiredness of checking the clock and finding that only 4 minutes have passed since you last checked. The tiredness of carrying a question you cannot yet answer. Not because you are not smart enough, not because you have not tried, but because the answer is not yours to give. It belongs to tomorrow, or next week, or some morning you cannot see from here. Most of our worry, when you look at it closely, is not about what has already happened. It is about the space between now and then, the gap, the not knowing, the long hallway with no doors. And the hardest thing about that hallway is not that it is dark. It is that you cannot walk any faster through it. You can only go at the speed the hallway allows, which is exactly the speed you are already going. There is a small story about patience that does not need many words. A child planted a seed in a pot of dark soil. She watered it carefully, the way her father had shown her, just enough, not too much, and placed the pot on the windowsill, where the morning light came in strong and warm. Then she waited. The first morning, she looked. Nothing. The soil was flat and brown and unchanged, as if it had not noticed the seed at all. The second morning, the same. By the third morning, the waiting had become unbearable. She took a stick and dug gently into the soil until she found the seed. It had cracked open. just barely, and a pale thread was reaching downward into the dark. She looked at it, disappointed. This was not a plant. This was barely anything at all. She covered it up and pressed the soil back down. On the 5th morning, she dug again. The thread was longer now, and a second one had appeared, reaching upward. But it was so small, so slow. She pushed the soil back and watered it again, pressing harder than she needed to, as if pressure could hurry the growing. On the 7th morning, she could not help herself. She dug down once more, deeper this time, and when she lifted the seed out of the soil, the tiny root, the one that had been reaching downward with such quiet determination, snapped. It broke cleanly, like a thread pulled too tight. She held the seed in her palm and cried. "It will not grow," she told her father. "I tried everything." Her father looked at the seed, at the broken root, at the hole in the soil. He did not scold her. He simply said, "It was growing. It just was not ready to show you yet." Some things grow in the dark, and the hardest kind of patience is the patience to let them. In a valley where the hills rose steeply on both sides, and the morning mist pooled like milk in a bowl, there lived a man who grew rice. He had grown it all his life, as his father had, and his father's father. So many generations that the terraces carved into the hillside felt less like something human hands had made, and more like something the hill itself had decided to become. The terraces descended in wide steps from the ridge to the valley floor, each one holding a shallow pool of water during the growing season, each one reflecting a different piece of the sky. In the early mornings, before the sun had climbed above the eastern ridge, the air was cool and smelled of turned earth and wet grass, and the faint smoke of cooking fires drifting up from the village below. The soil was dark and heavy, the kind that stained your hands and held the warmth of yesterday's sun deep inside it like a memory. When the farmer walked barefoot along the narrow banks between the paddies, he could feel the cold of the morning earth pressing up through his soles, and the small stones embedded in the clay, and the occasional silky touch of a root that had worked its way to the surface. His hands were broad, the knuckles swollen from decades of work, and the calluses on his palms were so thick that he could pick up a hot coal from the cooking fire and hold it for a moment without flinching. He carried a cloth bag of seed rice slung over one shoulder, the grains small and pale, almost weightless individually, but heavy in the aggregate. The way small worries are. He had finished planting 3 days ago. Every seed was in the ground. The paddies were flooded. The terraces were ready. Everything that could be done had been done. And then the sky refused to rain. Each morning he walked out to the terraces and looked up. Blue, clear, not a cloud, not a whisper. The sun rose and crossed the sky and set, and the water in the paddies dropped a little lower each day as the earth drank it in. His neighbors came to their own terraces and stood with their arms folded, looking at the same sky, saying the same things people always say when the rain does not come. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the wind will shift, maybe. At night, the farmer lay in bed and listened for rain. He listened so hard that he began to hear it in things that were not rain. The rustle of leaves outside the window, the distant sound of the stream that fed the lower paddies, his own pulse in his ears. His wife lay beside him, awake too, listening to him listen. One night she spoke. "You are holding your breath," she said. He exhaled. "I did not notice. You have been holding it for 3 days, since you finished planting." He was quiet for a moment, then, "If it does not rain this week, we lose the early crop. If we lose the early crop, we plant late. If we plant late." She touched his arm. She did not squeeze. She just rested her hand there, the way you rest a hand on a table, lightly, without expectation. You cannot pull the rain down from the sky, she said. I know that. Then what are you doing? Lying here, trying to pull it. He almost smiled. It is all I know how to do, he said. Work and worry. Without the work, there is only the worry. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you cannot water the whole field with a bucket, but you can water the row in front of you, and then the row behind it, and then you see. He turned to look at her in the dark. Even after all these years, she surprised him, not with cleverness, with steadiness. She did not pretend the danger was not real. She did not say, it would be fine. She said what could be done, and what could be done was always smaller than what he feared, and always larger than doing nothing. Dogen, the great Zen master, once offered a teaching that has carried many people through their own dry seasons. He said that no matter how difficult a state of mind you may find yourself in, if you keep strong and hold out, the floating clouds must eventually vanish, and the withering wind must cease. He did not say when. He did not promise speed. He only promised change. And change, as we heard earlier tonight, is the one thing that never fails to arrive. The farmer did not sleep well that night, but in the morning, before the sun had cleared the ridge, he was already walking to the stream with 2 wooden buckets hanging from a pole across his shoulders. He filled them. He carried them up the terraces, slowly, carefully, water sloshing against the sides. He poured 1 bucket into the first paddy. Then he walked back down to the stream and filled them again. He did this 7 times before the sun was fully up. It was not enough for the whole field. It was not even close. But the first 2 rows of seedlings stood a little straighter in the shallow water, and that was something. He did the same the next day, and the next, and the next. The rain came on the 5th day. It came without warning. A dark line on the western horizon that moved faster than he expected, and then a sound like 1,000 fingers drumming on the surface of the water. He was standing in the middle of the terraces when it hit. The water ran down his face and into his collar, and through his shirt to his skin. And he stood there with his arms at his sides and his face turned up to the sky, and he did not move. He did not know if the water on his cheeks was rain or something else. It did not matter. The rows he had watered by hand were greener than the rest, not by much, but enough to see. They had not waited for the rain. They had been tended, and the tending had mattered, even when it seemed too small to count. Patience is a word we use often, but understand rarely. We think it means waiting, sitting still, doing nothing until the thing we want arrives. But the farmer did not sit still. He carried water. He tended what was in front of him. He did not know if the rain would come. He did what could be done without knowing. The great Indian Buddhist poet, Shantideva, wrote something centuries ago that has the clean weight of a stone in your hand. He said, if there is a remedy, then what is the use of frustration? And if there is no remedy, then what is the use of frustration? Read it again, slowly, if you like. It is one of those sentences that unlocks a different door each time you pass through it. Either you can do something, in which case, do it and let the frustration go. Or you cannot, in which case the frustration serves no one, least of all you. Tonight you may be waiting for something, a result, an answer, a conversation you are not ready to have, a morning that feels very far from here, and the waiting feels like nothing, like empty space, like the gap between the question and the answer where nothing useful happens. But you are here, you are still here, and that is not nothing. Lying here, breathing, resting, this is not the absence of action. This is the deepest kind of action there is. The willingness to be present, without demanding that the present be different. In a house at the far end of a village where the road turned to dirt and the streetlights did not reach, A young woman sat at a wooden table and waited for news she was not sure she wanted to hear. The house was small, 2 rooms and a kitchen, a roof that leaked in one corner during heavy rain, walls that held the cold in winter and the heat in summer with equal stubbornness. Tonight was winter. The air in the room had a bite to it, and she could see her breath when she exhaled. Thin white clouds that disappeared before they reached the candle on the table. The candle was beeswax, and it smelled of honey and something deeper, something almost like hay. The flame was steady. There was no draft tonight, no wind finding its way through the cracks, and the light it threw was small but warm, turning the walls from grey to amber and casting her shadow large and wavering against the door behind her. She had wrapped herself in a wool blanket that smelled of lanolin and age. Her hands were cold despite the blanket, and she held them in her lap, fingers interlaced, the way people hold their hands when they are trying to keep something from escaping. Though she could not have said what, the clock on the wall ticked. It was an old clock, mechanical, and in the silence of the house, its sound was enormous. Each tick arriving with the weight of a small stone dropping into still water. She had never noticed how loud it was before. She had never had this much silence to hear it in. She had tried to read. The book lay open on the table, its pages unturned for an hour. She had tried to cook. There was a pot of soup on the stove, barely touched. She had tried to sleep, but sleep requires a kind of surrender she could not manage tonight. Every time she closed her eyes, the same question rose to the surface. What if the news is bad? What if it changes everything? What if tomorrow is a different world from today? She did not hear the knock at first. It was so soft it could have been the house settling. But then it came again. 3 gentle taps, unhurried, patient, and she opened the door to find the old woman from next door, standing in the dark, with a clay pot held between 2 towels. "I made too much rice porridge," the old woman said. This was not true, and they both knew it. But it was the kind of lie that is really a kindness, and the young woman stepped aside to let her in. The old woman did not ask what was wrong. She did not say everything will be fine, because she did not know if it would be. She did not say, "Do not worry," because she understood that telling someone not to worry is like telling water not to be wet. The instruction misunderstands the nature of the thing. She simply set the pot on the table, found 2 bowls in the cupboard, and ladled the porridge out. Steam rose from the bowls in slow curls. The smell of rice and ginger and a little sesame oil filled the small room, pushing the cold back toward the corners. They sat across from each other, the candle between them, the clock ticking, the porridge cooling just enough to eat. After a long silence, the kind of silence that is not empty but full of all the things that do not need to be said, the young woman spoke. "I cannot do anything," she said. "I just have to wait, and the waiting is the worst part." The old woman nodded. She took a slow spoonful of porridge. Then she said, very quietly, as if she were talking to the candle as much as to the young woman, "Sometimes the only thing you can do is be here. And being here is not nothing. Being here is everything there is to do." The young woman looked at her, "But it does not feel like enough." The old woman smiled. Dogen, an old teacher whose name you do not need to remember, once said that truth is not far away, it is nearer than near. She paused. "You are looking for peace somewhere in the future. But peace is here, in this room, in this porridge, in the fact that someone knocked on your door tonight and you opened it." They did not speak again for a long time. The porridge cooled. The candle burned lower, the wax pooling in a warm amber circle at its base. The old woman did not leave. She did not check the time. She did not offer advice or optimism or any of the well-meaning words that bounce off worry like rain off stone. She simply stayed. And in that staying, something shifted. The question, what if, did not disappear. It was still there, sitting at the table with them like a third guest. But it was quieter now, not because it had been answered, because it was no longer sitting alone. The candle guttered once, then steadied. The shadows on the wall shifted and resettled, and the two women sat together in the small, warm circle of light, the porridge between them, the night outside, the clock ticking its patient rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Like a heart that has decided without being asked to keep going. Shunryu Suzuki once said that it is easy to have calmness in inactivity, but hard to have calmness in activity. And that calmness in activity is true calmness. Perhaps tonight we can add one more layer to that. It is hardest of all to have calmness in waiting, in the space where you do not know, where the answer has not come and may not come tonight, and yet you are calm, or calmer than you were, not because the waiting is over, because you have stopped waiting alone. The Buddha had a word for this kind of strength. He called it khanti, patience. But the word means more than sitting still. It carries inside it a sense of endurance, of steadfastness, not the gritted teeth kind, not the kind that holds on by force, but the kind that holds on by trust. Khanti is the patience of the farmer who carries water to a field that may or may not see rain. It is the patience of the old woman who brings porridge to a neighbor who may or may not receive good news. It is the patience of someone who lies in the dark and breathes, not because they know everything will be fine, but because breathing is the one true thing they can do right now. And you are doing it. Right now, you are breathing. You are here. You have not left. That is not weakness. That is khanti. That is the deepest kind of courage. The courage to stay present when every part of you wants to leap ahead to the answer, to the morning, to the place where the not knowing ends. But the not knowing is where you are, and it is enough. It is enough to be here. It is enough to breathe. It is enough to let the night hold you while you wait. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have spoken tonight about worry, and about letting go, and about change, and about waiting. But there is one conversation we have not yet had, and it may be the most important one. It is the conversation about how you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. The voice that follows you to bed, the one that is harder to quiet than all the others, because it knows you too well. And the next story begins with a woman who sat alone in an empty classroom and heard that voice more clearly than she had in years. There is a voice that follows you to bed. You know the one. It is not the voice of worry, exactly. Worry talks about the future, about what might go wrong, about things that have not happened yet. This voice is different. It talks about you, about what you should have done, about what you failed to do, about the distance between who you are and who you think you should be. It is the voice that knows every shortcut you have taken, every word you wish you could pull back, every moment where you were less than you hoped to be. And it does not forget. It replays. It reviews. It offers its verdict. Always guilty, always insufficient. And then it starts again from the beginning. Tonight, let us talk about that voice. Not to silence it, not to argue with it, but to sit beside it and ask, very gently, where it learned to speak that way. The classroom was empty, and the silence was the loudest thing in it. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that rushes in to fill the space where 30 small voices had been only an hour ago. You could still feel them in the room, the drawings taped to the walls, a little crooked, the row of hooks by the door where coats had hung, now bare. A single red crayon on the floor beneath a chair, rolled there by a hand that was already thinking about something else. She sat at her desk, the teacher's desk, the big one at the front. But she did not feel big. She felt small, smaller than the chairs her students sat in, which came up to her knees and made her body fold awkwardly whenever she knelt beside a child to look at their work. The desk was cluttered with the debris of the day, stacks of worksheets, a mug of cold tea, a jar of colored pencils that had been sharpened so many times they were barely longer than her thumb. The room smelled of wax crayons and glue, and the faintly sweet scent of the hand soap the children used. Lavender, the school had chosen, because someone had read that lavender helps children calm down. She was not sure it worked on children. She was certain it did not work on her. Her back ached. It had been aching since the second hour of the morning, when she had spent 20 minutes crouched beside a boy who could not understand why 7 times 8 was not the same as 8 times 7, even though it was. Even though she had shown him 3 times on the number line. Her wrists were stiff from writing on the blackboard. She was one of the last teachers who still used chalk, not because she distrusted technology, but because she liked the feel of it, the resistance of the chalk against the slate, the way letters appeared, as if she were drawing them into existence. But none of that was why she was still sitting here, alone, in the fading light. It had happened after lunch. A girl, small, quiet, the kind of child who never raised her hand but always knew the answer, had spilled paint on another child's paper. It was an accident. Anyone could see it was an accident. But the other child screamed, and the class erupted. And in that moment, before she could think, before she could measure her voice or choose her words, she had spoken. Loudly, sharply, not at the girl exactly, but in her direction, and with a tone that was meant for the noise, but landed on the child. The girl, that was the worst part. She simply looked up with an expression that the teacher recognized immediately, because she had worn it herself as a child. The expression of someone who has just learned that the safe place is not always safe. The moment passed. The class settled. The afternoon continued. But inside the teacher's mind, the moment did not pass. It replayed. It replayed while she taught fractions. It replayed while she supervised recess. It replayed now, in the empty room, with the red crayon on the floor, and the cold tea on the desk, and the last of the autumn light sliding down the wall like something letting go. I should not be doing this job, she said to no one. It was the janitor who answered, not because she had been listening. She had simply arrived, as she did every evening, with her mop and her bucket, and her unhurried way of entering a room, as if she had been invited rather than employed. She was old. How old, the teacher had never asked. With hands that were rough and brown and steady. She had been cleaning this school for longer than the teacher had been alive. "You are still here," the janitor said. It was an observation, not a question. "I am replaying something," the teacher said. "Something I did wrong." The janitor set her bucket down. The water sloshed softly. She leaned the mop against the wall and looked at the teacher with the kind of patience that only comes from watching many people sit in empty rooms at the end of many days. "What did you do?" I raised my voice at a child who did not deserve it, and I cannot stop hearing it. The teacher pressed her fingers against her temples. Every time I replay it, it gets worse. The voice gets louder. The child's face gets sadder. I keep adding details that probably were not even there. The janitor nodded slowly. She had heard this before. Not these words, but this music. The melody of someone turning a mistake into a monument. "Can I tell you something?" the janitor said. The teacher looked up. "I clean this floor every day. Every day it is dirty, Mud, paint, juice, crumbs, glue, things I cannot even identify. She smiled. I do not get angry at the floor. I do not tell the floor it should be better. I do not stand here at 6 in the evening, asking the floor why it cannot stay clean. She picked up the mop. I just clean it. Tomorrow it will be dirty again, and I will clean it again. That is not failure. That is the job. Pema Chödrön, the beloved Buddhist teacher, once wrote that compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves, not as an afterthought, not as a reward for getting everything right, but as the starting point. The ground floor, the place from which all other kindness grows. The teacher watched the janitor begin to mop. The strokes were slow and even, the mop moving in wide arcs across the floor, leaving a wet trail that caught the last light from the window and turned it into something almost beautiful. There was no hurry in it, no judgment, just the cloth meeting the floor and the floor becoming clean, and the quiet sound of water doing what water does. She looked down at the red crayon beneath the chair. She picked it up. It was worn down to a stub, used and used and used by hands that did not worry about using it up. She placed it back in the jar on her desk with the others. Then she sat there for a moment longer, on the small chair she had pulled over without thinking, her knees high, her body folded, watching the janitor work in the last amber light of the afternoon. The room smelled of lavender soap and wet floors and the faintest trace of chalk. It smelled like a place that gets dirty and gets cleaned and does not hold a grudge about either. Tonight, if you are lying here, replaying something, a conversation that went sideways, a reaction you wish you could soften, a moment where you were less patient or less kind or less present than you wanted to be, you are not alone in that room. Everyone you have ever admired has sat in that same chair, in that same fading light, listening to the same voice tell them the same story about how they are not enough. But here is what Pema Chödrön also said, with the kind of warmth that makes you feel she is sitting right next to you. She said that loving kindness toward ourselves does not mean getting rid of anything, that we can still be imperfect after all these years. Read that again if you need to. You can still be imperfect. The goal was never perfection. The goal was presence, and you are here, imperfect and present and still trying. That counts. That has always counted. In a garden at the edge of a neighborhood where the houses gave way to open fields, an old man knelt in the dirt and talked to his plants. He had been doing this for years, not out of eccentricity, but out of the quiet conviction that attention itself is a form of nourishment. The garden was a community plot, a patchwork of small rectangles marked off by low wooden stakes and twine, each one tended by a different pair of hands. Some were immaculate, rows of tomatoes tied to bamboo poles, herbs trimmed to neat mounds, flowers blooming in coordinated waves. His was not immaculate. His was slow. The morning was early enough that the dew had not yet burned off. It clung to the leaves of the kale and the young lettuce in fat silver drops that caught the first light and held it like tiny lanterns. The soil beneath his knees was dark and cool, the kind of dark that means richness, that means things are breaking down and building up at the same time. It smelled of compost and wet grass, and the particular earthy sweetness that comes after a night of rain, a smell that lives somewhere between decay and birth, because in a garden they are the same thing. His hands were deep in the soil, loosening the earth around a rose bush he had planted the previous autumn. The bush had leafed out, green and healthy, its stems thickening, its thorns sharp, but it had not bloomed. Spring had come and gone. The roses in the neighboring plots had opened weeks ago, reds and pinks and pale yellows nodding in the breeze. But his bush sat there, green and silent, holding its buds like closed fists. He did not seem bothered. He watered it. He worked compost into the soil around its base. He checked for aphids. He talked to it, not in words, exactly, but in the way his hands moved around it, gentle and specific, the way you touch something you have decided to believe in. His grandson arrived at the garden gate just as the sun cleared the tree line. He was 7, maybe 8, the age where questions come faster than answers, and every comparison is a measurement. He walked along the row of plots, looking at each one, then stopped at his grandfather's. "Grandpa," he said, leaning on the wooden stake, "why are the neighbor's roses already blooming and yours are not?" The old man did not look up. He continued loosening the soil with his fingers, slow and deliberate. "Because the neighbor's roses are the neighbor's roses," he said, "and mine are mine. But his are prettier. His are further along. That is not the same as prettier." The boy squatted down beside him, the way children do, effortlessly, balanced on his heels. "Are you sad that yours have not bloomed?" The old man finally looked at him. His face was weathered, the lines deep, but his eyes were the youngest thing about him. "No," he said, "I am not sad." "Why not?" "Because every plant has its own calendar. Some bloom early, some bloom late. Some bloom once and stop. Some bloom so slowly you do not notice until one morning the whole bush is covered in flowers, and you cannot remember when it started." He wiped his hands on his knees, leaving dark smudges on the faded fabric. Shunryu Suzuki, a wise old teacher, once said something very simple. He said, "To live is enough. Not to live perfectly, not to live ahead of schedule, not to bloom when the neighbors bloom, just to live, to be here, to put your roots down in the dark and trust that the rest will happen when it is ready." The boy thought about this for a moment. "Then do you want the roses to bloom faster?" The old man smiled. "I want them to bloom when they are ready. The same way I want you to grow when you are ready. Not when I am ready, not when the world is ready. When you are ready." The boy sat down fully on the ground, cross-legged, and began to dig with a small stick around the base of the rosebush, imitating his grandfather's movements. They did not speak. The morning grew warmer, the dew burned off, the bees arrived, and 2 pairs of hands, one old and rough, one small and soft, worked the earth in the kind of silence that is not empty but full, full of the things that do not need to be said because they are being done. The rosebush stood between them, green and patient, its buds still closed. It was not failing, it was not behind, it was gathering. And when it finally opened, as it would, on a morning neither of them would think to mark, it would open completely, the way things do when they have been given enough time and enough care and enough of the one thing the world is always in a hurry to skip: trust. A woman sat on a stone bench in a park as the afternoon faded. It was autumn, the kind of autumn afternoon where the light turns everything golden and makes even ordinary things look like paintings. People walked past, a man with a dog, a couple sharing an umbrella they did not need, a child on a bicycle, wobbling, determined. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Everyone seemed to be inside a life that made sense. She did not feel inside anything. She felt between jobs, between plans, between the person she had been and the person she was supposed to become. And in that between space, with the golden light and the passing strangers and the empty bench beside her, she heard it. The voice, her voice, the one that lived inside the silence, like a tenant who never pays rent but never leaves. "You are falling behind," it said. "Everyone else has figured it out. You should be further along by now. You should try harder. You should want more. You should be more." She had heard this voice every day, for as long as she could remember, It was so familiar that she had mistaken it for truth. The way you mistake the hum of a refrigerator for silence. It is always there, so you stop noticing it. And then one day the power goes out, and the hum stops, and the real silence is so shocking that you realize you have never actually heard it before. She sat on the bench, and, for the first time, she did not argue with the voice. She did not try to prove it wrong. She did not list her accomplishments or defend her choices. She just listened, and in listening, really listening, the way you might listen to a stranger on a train, she realized something. The cruelest words she had ever heard had not come from a boss or a teacher or a parent or a friend. They had come from her. She had been saying them to herself every morning and every night, in the shower, in the car, in the dark before sleep. And she had never once questioned them. Not because they were true, but because they were hers. She did not fix this. She did not stand up and declare a new beginning. She just noticed, and the noticing, that small, quiet act of seeing the voice for what it was already the first kindness she had shown herself in a very long time. Self-compassion is a phrase that sounds soft, almost indulgent, as if it means letting yourself off the hook. But it is not that. It is not self-praise. It is not pretending you did everything right. It is something much simpler and much harder. It is the decision to stop adding pain to pain, to stop meeting every mistake with cruelty and every shortcoming with contempt. It is not adding anything. It is removing the voice that was never yours to begin with, the one you borrowed from fear and dressed up as motivation. Pema Chödrön once said, "You are the sky. Everything else, the worry, the shame, the self-criticism, the replaying, is just the weather. Weather passes. It always passes. But the sky does not go anywhere. The sky does not flinch when the storm arrives. It holds the storm, and the clear day after, and the next storm after that, all with the same vast, unhurried patience. Perhaps right now, without trying, something in your body has already softened. Perhaps the jaw has unclenched. Perhaps the fists you did not know you were making have loosened. Perhaps the space between your eyebrows has widened just a little, like a door opening onto a room you forgot was there. This is not something you are doing. This is what your body does when the mind stops telling it that it is wrong. Your body knows how to rest. It has always known. It was just waiting for permission. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it metta, loving kindness. We usually think of metta as something we send outward, to others, to strangers, to the difficult people in our lives. But the Buddha taught it differently. He said it starts here, in this body, in this breath, in the way you hold yourself when no one is watching. Like a mother protecting her only child, he said, with that fierceness, that tenderness, that refusal to look away. And the first child, the one who needs it most, is you. Tonight, you do not need to forgive yourself for everything. You do not need to resolve anything. You only need to stop adding one more unkind word to the pile. Just for tonight. Just for this breath. The floor is dirty. It is always dirty. And tomorrow, you will clean it. But tonight, you can rest. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a quieter kind of peace that has been waiting for us all along. It does not live in grand gestures or deep insights. It lives in the smallest things. A cup of tea, a broom sweeping a courtyard, a breath taken without thinking. And the next story begins with a woman who woke up every morning at 4 to make bread, and who wondered, for a very long time, if that was enough. The bakery was dark from the outside. If you walked past it at 4 in the morning, which almost no one did, you would see nothing but a closed door and a window reflecting the empty street. But behind the door, behind the window, a woman was already working. She had been working at this hour for 15 years, and her body no longer needed an alarm. It simply woke, the way bread rises, not because someone tells it to, but because that is what it does. The first thing she did every morning was light the oven. It was an old brick oven, the kind that takes an hour to reach the right temperature, the kind that remembers yesterday's heat in its walls and gives it back slowly. The flame caught, and the warmth began to spread through the small room like a hand opening. She could feel it on her face first, a soft press of heat against her cheeks, her forehead, the bridge of her nose, and then on her arms as she rolled up her sleeves and reached for the flour. The flour was in a wooden bin beneath the counter. She scooped it with both hands, and it fell into the bowl in a white cloud that rose and settled and left a fine dust on her dark apron. The smell was faint but specific, dry and clean, almost like paper, with a sweetness beneath it that you could only catch if you leaned in close. She added water, salt, a pinch of sugar, the yeast she had fed the night before. The yeast smelled alive, tangy, warm, the smell of something working in the dark. Then she began to knead. The sound of kneading is one of the oldest sounds in the world. Thup, 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 the heels of her hands pressing the dough forward, folding it back, pressing again. The wooden counter was smooth from years of this motion, worn into a shallow valley where the dough always sat. She could feel the dough changing beneath her palms, from rough and shaggy to smooth and elastic, from something that fell apart to something that held together. It was the same transformation every morning, and it never stopped being miraculous, even when she had forgotten to call it that. Outside the window, the street was black and empty. The streetlight on the corner cast a pale circle on the pavement that no one walked through. The world had not yet started, but she had. She was the first thing moving in the dark, and there was a loneliness in that. And also, on the best mornings, a kind of holiness, though she would never have used that word. But lately, the mornings had felt less holy and more heavy. She had begun to notice what her friends were doing, traveling, changing careers, pursuing passions with names she did not recognize. One had started painting, another had moved to another country, a third had written a book, and she woke at 4 and made bread. Every day the same flour, the same oven, the same rhythm of hands on dough. She had started to wonder, in the quiet dark before the first loaf came out, whether this was enough, whether she was enough, whether a life measured in loaves was a life at all. The old man arrived at 6, as he always did. He was her first customer, had been for years. He came for 1 loaf of sourdough, still warm, wrapped in brown paper. He paid in exact change. He never hurried, and today he noticed something. "You are quiet this morning," he said. She shrugged. "I am always quiet at 6. "No, you are quiet in a different way. The way people are quiet when they are carrying something." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said it, because he was the kind of person you could say things to. "I only make bread," she said, "every day the same. I wake up, I knead, I bake, I sell, and I am starting to wonder if that is all I will ever do. If there is something more I should be doing, something that matters more." The old man looked at her with an expression she could not read. It was not pity, it was not surprise. It was something closer to tenderness, the kind that comes from recognizing something you have felt yourself. "Do you know what I did for 40 years?" he said. "I built bridges, not small ones, real ones, the kind that carry trains and trucks and the weight of 1,000 daily crossings. People told me it was important work, and it was. But you know what I thought about every night, lying in my bed, in whatever town the job had taken me to?" She shook her head. "Bread," he said. Warm bread from a bakery that knew my name. I could not tell you the names of the bridges, but I remember every bakery. He held the warm loaf against his chest. He looked at it the way someone looks at a letter from an old friend. I have traveled to many places, he said. I have seen temples and mountains and cities that shine at night like bowls of stars. I have met people who have built extraordinary things, but I will tell you what the most valuable thing I ever found was. He paused. A warm loaf of bread from the hands of someone who was truly here when she made it. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Zen teacher, once said that life is available only in the present moment, not in the future, not in the plans you have not yet made, not in the life you think you should be living. Here, now, in the flour on your apron, and the heat of the oven, and the sound of your own hands, doing the work they know how to do. You think meaning is somewhere far away, the old man said, but it is here, in the dough, in the oven, in the hands that wake at 4 in the morning because someone somewhere needs warm bread today. That is not small, that is everything. He tucked the loaf under his arm, nodded once, and walked out into the grey morning. The bell above the door chimed softly and fell silent. She stood behind the counter. Her hands were still dusted with flour. The oven was still warm at her back. Outside, the first light was beginning to show at the edge of the sky. Not yet sunrise, just the suggestion of it, the way the world clears its throat before speaking. For the first time in months, she did not want to be anywhere else. She did not want to be someone else. She looked down at her hands. Flour in the creases of knuckles, warmth in the palms, and thought that these hands had fed more people than she could count. Not with anything complicated, not with anything rare, with bread, the oldest, simplest food there is. And every morning they began again. What the baker was beginning to touch, without knowing the name for it, is something Shunryu Suzuki described with the directness of a man who had spent a lifetime sitting still. He said that to have some deep feeling about Buddhism is not the point. We just do what we should do, like eating supper and going to bed. This is Buddhism, not meditation on a mountain, not enlightenment in a flash of light. Eating supper, going to bed, making bread, sweeping the floor. The holiest things are the things we do so often that we forget they are holy. We are taught to look for meaning in the extraordinary, in the peak experiences, the life-changing decisions, the moments that feel like movies. But the Zen tradition says something different. It says that the extraordinary is hidden inside the ordinary, the way fire is hidden inside wood. You do not need to go anywhere to find it. You only need to be where you already are. Dogen, who understood this as deeply as anyone who has ever lived, put it this way: in the mundane, nothing is sacred. In sacredness, nothing is mundane. It is a sentence that turns itself inside out the longer you sit with it. If everything is sacred, then nothing is excluded. Not the bread, not the broom, not the breath you are taking right now. And tonight, lying here, you are not doing nothing. You are resting, and resting, truly resting, with your whole body, with your whole attention, is one of the most sacred things a human being can do. The world will tell you that rest is what happens when the important things are finished. But the Zen tradition says, rest is the important thing. It is not the space between the work. It is the work. It is the bread rising in the dark. It is the courtyard being swept. It is you right now, exactly where you are, in a monastery where the days began before the sun and ended after the moon. A young monk was given the job of sweeping the courtyard. It was not a prestigious job. It was not a punishment either. It was simply what needed to be done. And he was the newest, and the newest always sweeps. The courtyard was large. A wide rectangle of grey stone, bordered by wooden buildings on 3 sides and a low wall on the 4th, beyond which you could see the hills. And, on clear mornings, the distant line of mountains. The stones were old, smoothed by centuries of footsteps and weather, and they held the cold of the night long into the morning. When the young monk walked across them in his sandals, he could feel the chill pressing up through the thin soles into the balls of his feet. Autumn had come, and with it the leaves. The maple tree in the corner of the courtyard, the only tree inside the walls, had begun to release its cargo. Yellow leaves, orange leaves, leaves the color of rust and wine. They fell slowly, without sound, drifting on currents of air that were too slight to feel, but strong enough to carry a leaf from one side of the courtyard to the other. By morning, the stones were covered. He swept with a bamboo broom. The handle was smooth and cool in his hands, polished by the grip of monks who had held it before him. The bristles made a clean sound against the stone. Swish, 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 a rhythm, so steady it became a kind of breathing. He swept the leaves into a pile at the base of the wall. It took 20 minutes. When he finished, the courtyard was clean. The grey stones shone faintly in the early light. He leaned the broom against the wall and stood for a moment, admiring the emptiness. Then the wind blew, and the maple, indifferent to his efforts, released another handful of leaves. They drifted down like slow, lazy confetti and landed exactly where he had just swept. He stared at them. Then he picked up the broom and swept again. And the next morning, the same. And the morning after that. By the 4th day, something inside him had begun to tighten. It was a small thing, a wire of frustration that wound itself a little tighter each morning when he saw the leaves on the stones. He had not come to the monastery to sweep. He had come to understand something, to find something. And here he was, doing the same useless thing over and over, while the tree above him laughed in gold and orange. He found the old monk sitting on the wooden porch outside the meditation hall, drinking tea from a bowl he held in both hands. The steam rose in a thin thread. The old monk did not look up when the young one approached. He simply waited, the way old monks wait, as if time were a guest they had long since stopped rushing. "I have a question," the young monk said. The old monk took a sip of tea. "I sweep the courtyard every morning, and every morning the leaves come back. Is there a point?" The old monk looked out at the courtyard. The leaves were already falling again. 2, 3, drifting down in spirals. "You think the purpose of sweeping is a clean courtyard," he said. "Is it not?" The old monk smiled. "If the purpose of sweeping were a clean courtyard, then you would be right, it would be pointless. The courtyard will never stay clean. But sweeping is not about the courtyard. Sweeping is about sweeping." The young monk frowned. "The leaves do not fall to test you," the old monk said gently. "They fall so that you have a reason to be here this morning, to hold the broom, to feel the stones beneath your feet, to hear the sound of the bristles and the wind and your own breathing. That is not nothing, that is everything." He took another sip of tea. Then he added, with a kind of simplicity that lands like a stone in still water, "Sweeping when the courtyard needs sweeping, eating when you are hungry, sleeping when you are tired. This is the whole of practice. This is the whole of everything." The young monk returned to the courtyard. He picked up the broom, but this time he did not sweep to finish. He swept to sweep. The bristles touched the stone and the sound was the same. Swish, swish, but he heard it differently now. It was not the sound of futility. It was the sound of being exactly where he was, doing exactly what was in front of him, with nothing left over and nothing missing. A leaf fell on his shoulder. He let it stay. Another landed at his feet, and he swept it into the pile without breaking rhythm. Not as a correction, but as a continuation. The pile at the base of the wall grew slowly, a small mountain of gold and rust and wine, dark red. It would scatter by afternoon, he knew that now. And for the first time, the knowing did not feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. The freedom of doing something that does not need to last in order to matter. From the gate of the monastery, if you had been standing there that morning, you would have seen something simple and complete. A young man in dark robes, small against the wide grey courtyard, a bamboo broom in his hands. Leaves falling around him like slow golden rain, the broom moving in its steady arc, and the monk inside the motion, unhurried, unfinished, present. The way a candle is present inside its own light. There is an old Zen story, very short, that does not need anything added to it. A student came to his teacher and asked, "What is the most extraordinary thing you have ever done?" The teacher said, "I eat rice when I am hungry. I drink water when I am thirsty." The student looked confused. Everyone does that. The teacher shook his head slowly. Very few people are truly there when they do it. Consider what it means to eat a bowl of rice with your whole attention, the bowl warm in your hands. Ceramic, perhaps, or wood, slightly rough at the rim where the glaze did not reach. The steam rising in a thin curl that disappears before it reaches your chin. The first grain on your tongue. Its texture, its weight, the faint sweetness you have never noticed because you were always chewing while thinking about something else. The second grain, identical and completely different. The way the warmth spreads from your hands into your wrists and from your stomach outward. And from the simple fact of eating into something that feels, for just a moment, like gratitude. When you are truly here for a bowl of rice, the bowl becomes enough. Not because it is special, because you are, because your attention has turned an ordinary thing into something that cannot be improved upon, or replaced, or upgraded. It is already whole. And so are you. Tonight, lying here, you are doing the most ordinary thing in the world. Breathing. Resting. Letting the day end the way days have ended for as long as there have been days. But notice, if you can, without effort, without trying to notice, the weight of the blanket against your body, the temperature of the air on your face. Is it cool? Is it warm? Is it somewhere in between? Notice the sound of your own breathing. That quiet, steady rhythm that has been with you since the very first moment of your life. It has never stopped. It has never asked for thanks. It has simply continued, breath after breath, holding you here. Pema Chödrön once said, "Appreciate everything, even the ordinary, especially the ordinary, because the ordinary is where you live, not in the peak moments, not in the breakthroughs. In the bread and the broom and the breath." The Buddha had a word for this kind of attention. He called it sati, mindfulness. But the word, in its original language, means something closer to remembering. Not remembering the past. Remembering to be here. Remembering that you are alive, that you are breathing. That this moment, this one, right now, is not a waiting room for a better moment. It is the moment, the whole thing, and it is already enough. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more thread to follow tonight. It is about the moments when everything changes at once, when the ground shifts beneath you, and you do not know where to stand. And it begins beside the sea, on a morning when the water was not what it seemed. There are nights when you lie down, and the worry is not about one thing, it is about everything. The job that is no longer certain, the relationship that has changed shape without warning, the body that does not feel the way it used to, the future that looked clear last month and now looks like fog. On nights like that, the mind does not circle one problem, it circles the whole sky. And what you want, more than anything, is for something, anything, to hold still. Dogen, who spent his life studying the nature of things as they are, once wrote that to be in harmony with the wholeness of things is not to have anxiety over imperfections, not to fix the imperfections, not to ignore them, but to stop demanding that the world arrive without them, to be in harmony with the whole, the broken and the beautiful, the steady and the shifting. That is what we are reaching for tonight. There is a plant that understands this better than most people do. When a storm comes to the hills where bamboo grows, the wind does not ask permission. It arrives all at once. A wall of sound and force that bends the trees and strips the leaves and turns the rain sideways. The older trees, the ones with thick trunks and rigid branches, stand their ground. They lock their joints and push back against the gale, and some of them hold, but some of them crack. You can hear it in the dark, a deep, slow splitting, like a door being forced open from the inside. By morning, the forest floor is littered with branches thick as a man's leg, torn loose by their own resistance. But the bamboo does something different. When the wind comes, it bends. The whole stalk curves toward the ground, not collapsing, not breaking, but yielding. The way a dancer yields to music, the way water yields to the shape of its container. The roots hold firm in the dark earth, gripping the soil with a network of fibers so dense and tangled that they would take a shovel and an hour to unearth. But above the ground, the bamboo gives. It leans so far that its tip nearly touches the mud. The wind screams over it. The rain batters its leaves, and it holds, not by pushing back, but by bowing down. When the storm passes, and storms always pass, the bamboo straightens, slowly, joint by joint, like someone rising from a deep bow. By the time the sun reaches the grove, the bamboo is upright again, not damaged, not diminished, standing exactly as tall as it stood before, with the rain still dripping from its leaves like something it has already forgotten. It did not survive the storm because it was stronger than the wind. It survived because it did not try to be. On a stretch of coast where the land fell away sharply into the sea, and the mornings were more fog than light, a fisherman prepared his boat for the day. He had been doing this since he was 14, since his father had first taken him out past the breakers in a wooden boat that smelled of salt and engine oil and fish scales, dried silver in the sun. That was 30 years ago. The father was gone now. The boat was different, but the sea was the same sea. And the fisherman was still the boy who had gripped the gunwale with both hands the first time a wave lifted the bow higher than his head. The harbor was small, a half-moon of stone wall, built by hands that had been dead for a century, enclosing a patch of calm water where a dozen boats rested on their lines. His boat was the third from the end, a broad-hulled fishing vessel with peeling blue paint and a diesel engine that started on the third try if you were lucky, and the fifth if you were not. The deck was damp with the night's moisture, and when he stepped aboard barefoot, he always worked barefoot, the way his father had. The wood was cold and slightly gritty with salt beneath his feet. The ropes coiled in the stern were stiff with dried spray, rough against his palms when he gathered them. The fog this morning was thick enough to taste. A faint salt on the lips, a dampness that settled on the skin and into the fabric of his jacket. He could smell the sea in layers. The brine of the surface, the deeper mineral scent of the rocks below the waterline, the sweet rot of the seaweed drying on the harbor wall. The water inside the harbor was flat and dark, but beyond the breakwater, he could hear the open ocean, the low, continuous murmur of swells building and breaking, the rhythm that never stopped and never repeated exactly the same way twice. That was the thing about the sea. It never repeated. You could fish the same waters for 30 years, and never see the same day twice. Some mornings the surface was glass, so still that the reflection of the sky was perfect, and you felt as if you were floating between two worlds. Other mornings, the swells rolled in from the horizon like slow grey mountains, and the boat climbed and dropped, and your stomach climbed and dropped with it. And there was no way to know, standing here in the harbour at dawn, which sea was waiting for you beyond the wall. This used to terrify him, not the storms themselves. He had ridden out storms. He knew what to do when the wind came hard and the rain came sideways and the waves broke over the bow. What terrified him was the not knowing, the helplessness of standing on a shore and looking at water that would not tell you what it was planning. He wanted the sea to be predictable. He wanted it to keep a schedule. He wanted, more than anything, for the surface to mean what it said. But the sea does not mean what it says. A calm morning can turn rough by noon. A grey sky can clear in an hour. The water that looks gentle can hide a current that pulls you 3 miles south before you notice. His father had known this, not as a source of anxiety, but as a fact. The way you know that fire is hot, that ice is cold, that the sun will set. He remembered a morning, years ago, when he was still young enough to be frightened by a forecast. The radio had said rough seas. His father had listened, nodded, and begun preparing the boat. "Are we still going out?" the boy had asked. His father had looked at him, not with impatience, not with bravado, but with something the boy would only understand much later. Something steady. "The boat is not safe because the sea is calm," his father had said. "The boat is safe because the person in it knows the sea will change." He did not say more. He did not need to. The sentence carried everything: the acceptance, the readiness, the refusal to be surprised by what was always coming. Not courage in the way movies show courage. Something quieter, something that lives in the hands and the feet and the way you tie a knot. And that does not need applause, because it does not know it is being brave. Pema Chödrön, who has spent a lifetime teaching people how to stay present in the middle of things falling apart, once observed that nothing ever goes away until it teaches us what we need to know. The sea had been teaching this fisherman for 30 years. The same lesson, in different waves. And the lesson was not how to predict, it was how to stay. This morning, the fog was thick, and the sea beyond the wall was invisible. He could hear it, but not see it. He did not know what the day would bring, but he stepped aboard anyway. He untied the lines. He started the engine. 3rd try today, which felt like a good sign. And the boat moved out through the narrow mouth of the harbour, into the fog, into the unknown water, the way it had moved out 1,000 mornings before. From the shore, if you had been watching, you would have seen the boat grow smaller in the fog. The blue hull fading first, then the mast, then the dark shape of the man at the wheel. The last thing you would have heard was the low throb of the diesel engine, steady and unhurried, and then the sound of a single oar touching the water as he adjusted his course. And then the fog closed around him, and there was only the sea, and the man, and the morning. Equanimity is a word that sounds like calm, but it is not calm. Calm needs everything to be smooth. Equanimity does not. Equanimity is the steadiness that remains when the smoothness is gone. It is the fisherman stepping into the fog. It is the bamboo bending in the wind. It is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward without waiting for the fear to leave first. Tonight, the sea of your life may feel unpredictable. Things you thought were steady have begun to shift. Plans that felt solid have turned to water in your hands. And you are lying here, in the dark, wondering how to stand on something that will not hold still. But you are standing. You are here, and the ground does not need to be still for you to be steady. You have been steady all along, not because nothing has gone wrong, but because something in you knows how to hold, the way the bamboo holds, the way the fisherman holds, from the roots, from the center, from a place that the wind cannot reach. In a small apartment in a city that was neither large nor small, a young woman sat by a window and watched the rain. She had been watching it for an hour, maybe longer. Time had become unreliable tonight, stretching in some places, collapsing in others, the way it does when the mind has too much to hold and not enough hands to hold it with. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. The window faced the street, and through it she could see the glow of the street lamp across the road, a soft orange circle that the rain turned into something impressionist, all smeared edges and running color. The glass was cold when she pressed her forehead against it. The rain made a sound that was almost musical on the pane, not steady, not rhythmic, but patterned in a way that only rain understands. Sometimes, a gust of wind would throw a handful of drops against the glass all at once, like applause, and then it would ease again into a murmur. She was wrapped in a blanket that she had owned since university. It was worn thin at the edges and smelled of fabric softener and something older, the accumulation of years of warmth, years of being the thing she reached for when the world felt too large. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of chrysanthemum tea. The cup was warm, not hot. She had been holding it long enough for the temperature to match her own. The tea smelled of dried flowers and honey, and something faintly medicinal, the way all good remedies smell. A week ago she had a job, a plan, a 5-year trajectory that she could have drawn on a napkin. This year, next year, the year after that, each one building on the last like steps in a staircase. The company had closed. Not her fault, not anyone's fault really. Just the economy, the market, the currents that move beneath the surface of things and pull the ground out from under you while you are busy looking up. She had done what people do. She had updated her resume. She had called her parents. She had made a list of things to do tomorrow. But tonight, the list was on the table and she was at the window, and the distance between the two felt like the distance between here and the moon. Her mind ran. It had been running all day. A hamster wheel of should find a new job, should call that contact, should have saved more money, should have seen this coming, should. The word itself like a small fist knocking on a door that no one was going to open. And then she looked at the rain. It was still falling. It had been falling for hours. It did not need permission. It did not need a plan. It did not stop to wonder whether it was falling on the right street or at the right time or for the right reason. It just fell, and the street received it, and the gutters carried it, and somewhere, eventually, it would reach a river, and the river would reach the sea, and the sea would lift it up again, and it would fall all over. And at no point in that entire cycle would anyone ask it to explain itself. She thought about that. She sat with it the way you sit with a person who has said something that needs time to land. Pema Chödrön once said, "Let your curiosity be greater than your fear." The young woman did not know this quote, but she felt it. A small flicker, barely visible, like a pilot light that has been burning in a dark room without anyone noticing. What if this is not an ending? What if this is just weather? The kind that passes, the kind that leaves the air cleaner than it was before. She did not know the answer. She did not need to. The question itself was enough. It was the first thought in hours that had not started with should. The rain eased, not all at once, gradually, the way a conversation quiets when everyone has said what they needed to say. The drops on the window grew smaller, less frequent. The street lamp across the road sharpened, its edges coming back into focus, its light no longer smeared but defined, precise, a circle of orange on wet pavement. She looked at her cup. It was empty. She did not remember finishing the tea. She looked at the window, at the clearing street, at the world reassembling itself on the other side of the glass. Everything had changed. Her job was still gone. Her plan was still broken. The list on the table was still waiting. But she was still here, still sitting, still breathing, still wrapped in the blanket that had been keeping her warm since she was 22 years old. And that, the simple fact of still being here, of not having been washed away by the storm that had swept through her life, was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the largest thing she had, the one thing the rain could not touch. The empty teacup sat on the windowsill, catching the light from the street lamp. The rain had stopped. The world outside was quiet and wet and new, the way it always is after a storm, as if everything has been rinsed and is waiting to dry. And the young woman sat in her blanket and her silence and looked out at a night that was, for the first time in a week, simply a night, not a crisis, not an ending, just a night, with morning on the other side of it. Shunryu Suzuki once said that if your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. Perhaps tonight, what feels like emptiness, the lost plan, the missing certainty, the wide open space where the future used to be, is not a void. It is an opening, the kind of opening that can hold whatever comes next, because it is not already full of what was supposed to come. The Buddha had a word for this steadiness. He called it upekkha, equanimity. The word comes from two roots, upa, which means over or above, and ik, which means to see from above, to look from a place that is wide enough to hold the whole picture, not just the wave, but the ocean, not just the rain, but the sky that holds the rain and the sun that comes after. Upekkha is not indifference. It is not the numbness that comes from caring too little. It is the clarity that comes from seeing enough, from stepping back, not away, but back, far enough to see that the storm is inside a larger stillness, that the wave is inside a larger sea, that the night is inside a larger turning, that always eventually brings the light. And perhaps right now, without deciding to, you have already stepped back. Your body is heavier than it was an hour ago. Your breath is slower. The day that felt so large this morning is smaller now. Not because it changed, but because you are seeing it from further away. From here, from rest, from the place where the bamboo straightens and the fisherman returns, and the rain stops and the street lamp sharpens and the cup is empty, and you are still here. You are still here. And that is not nothing. That is everything. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have traveled a long way tonight. Through worry and letting go, through change and patience, through kindness and simplicity, and the steadiness that holds them all. There is one more story waiting. The last one. And it begins in a very quiet room, where a young mother lies beside her sleeping child and discovers something about worry that all the teachings in the world could not have told her. We have come to the end of our journey tonight, and what a gentle distance we have traveled. We began with a seamstress who could not stop checking her seams, and a young monk who learned that a fire does not need you to worry about it. It only needs you to be here. We sat with a carpenter who kept every scrap of wood because letting go felt too much like losing, and a nun who discovered that the most beautiful part of a garden is the space you make when you finally pull the weeds. We stood beside a flower seller who saw beauty in fading, and a potter who found that a crack does not ruin a vase. It finishes its story. We waited with a farmer who carried water to a dry field, and an old woman who brought porridge to a neighbor, and did not say everything, "We'll be fine," because she did not know if it would. She just stayed. We listened to a teacher who heard her own harshness echoing in an empty room, and a gardener who talked to a rosebush that had not yet decided to bloom. We watched a baker knead dough in the dark, and a young monk sweep leaves that kept falling. And we stood on a shore with a fisherman who learned from his father that the boat is not safe because the sea is calm. It is safe because the person in it knows the sea will change. All of these people, all of these quiet rooms and open fields and moonlit shores, all of them carrying the same thing you are carrying tonight, and all of them in their own way setting it down. Tonight we spoke about worry, about the way the mind stirs itself like water in a bowl, creating waves where there were none. The Buddha called it uddhaka kukuka, restlessness and worry, and he described it as a veil. Not a wall, not a prison, a veil. Something thin, something you can see through if you hold still long enough. And perhaps, lying here now, the veil has grown thinner. Not because you tore it down, not because you fought your way through, but because you stopped stirring. You let your hands rest. You let the surface settle. And what you can see now, dimly perhaps, but there, is your own reflection. Not the reflection of the person you think you should be. The reflection of the person who is here, tired, imperfect, still breathing, still present. That is enough. That has always been enough. Imagine the worry as a candle burning on a table in a quiet room. It gives off light, a small flickering light that makes the shadows move. It is real. The flame is real. The heat is real. But the candle does not burn forever. It cannot. That is not what candles do. They burn. They give what they have. And then they go out. Not because someone blew them out. Because the wax is gone, because the wick has done its work. You do not need to blow out the candle of your worry tonight. You only need to let it burn in a safe room, this night, this voice. It will find its own end. It always does. And we spoke about letting go, about upadana, the fuel that keeps the fire burning, the scraps we hold, the old wood we stack against the walls of our minds. Not because we need it, because we are afraid that without it, the room will be too empty. But look at your hands right now. Not with your eyes. You do not need to open your eyes. Just feel them, wherever they are resting. On the blanket, on your chest, beside you on the pillow. Notice them. Are they open or closed? Are the fingers curled or soft? You do not need to change anything. Just notice, an open hand is not an empty hand. It is a ready hand, ready for sleep, ready for morning, ready for whatever arrives next. You have been holding so many things today. Responsibilities, worries, plans, regrets. The weight of being a person in a world that asks a lot of its people, and you have held them well. But tonight, you can set them on the step outside the door, the way the carpenter set down that first small piece of wood. Not throwing them away, just letting them rest. They will be there in the morning if you need them. But tonight, they do not need you, and you do not need them. There is one more story, the last one, and it does not take place in a workshop, or a garden, or a monastery, or a boat. It takes place in a room very much like the one you are in right now. It takes place in the dark, and it begins with a woman who could not sleep. She was young, younger than she felt, which is something that happens when you carry more than your age was built to hold. She had a child. The child was small, 2 years old, maybe 3, the age when sleep is still a natural talent, something the body does without asking permission, the way flowers open, the way rain falls. The child was asleep beside her. She could feel the small body's warmth against her side, a heat that was different from any other heat in the world, not the heat of a fire or a stove or a summer day, a human heat, a tiny furnace of blood and breath and dreaming. pressed against her ribs, radiating through the thin cotton of the sheet. The room was dark, but not completely. Moonlight came through the curtain, not bright, not enough to read by, but enough to see the outline of things, the edge of the pillow, the curve of the child's cheek, the shadow of the curtain moving slightly in a draft. She could not feel but could see the fabric breathing, the way fabric breathes in old houses where the windows do not quite seal. She could hear the child breathing. It was the smallest sound in the room, and also the largest, a soft, steady rhythm, in and out, with a whistle whistle on the exhale that came from a nose no bigger than a button. The sound was so regular, so unhurried, so entirely without effort, that it made the silence around it feel sacred, like a temple built around a single candle. She could smell the child too, that particular smell that belongs only to sleeping children. Milk and soap and skin, and something else, something you could never bottle or name, something that lives in the hair behind the ear and in the crease of the neck, and that disappears slowly as the child grows, until one day you realize you cannot remember it anymore, and you would give anything to smell it one more time. The clock on the wall ticked. The house settled around her. Small sounds, familiar sounds, the language of a building adjusting to the temperature of the night. A pipe expanding somewhere behind the wall, a floorboard contracting in the hallway. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, steady and low, a mechanical lullaby that had been singing the same note since they moved in. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, with a sound like pages turning in a book no one was reading. The world doing what it does when no one is watching, being itself, without performance, without worry. And she lay there, awake, in the middle of all this quiet beauty, and she worried. She worried about money, not in the abstract way that people worry about the economy, in the specific 3 a.m. way that has teeth and numbers, and a voice that sounds like a calculator. The rent was due in 9 days. The electricity bill had been higher last month because the heater ran all night, because the child was cold, because children are always cold in winter, because keeping a child warm costs money that does not grow back as fast as you spend it. The shoes. The child would need new shoes next month, because children's feet grow the way the economy does not. Relentlessly, regardless of circumstance, indifferent to budgets and plans, and the careful arithmetic of a mother who counts every coin as if it were a prayer. She worried about work, about the meeting she had tomorrow, about the email she had not answered, about the performance review that was coming, and whether she had done enough, been enough, produced enough to justify the space she took up in a building she did not own. She worried about the future, not the grand future, not climate change or politics or the state of the world, but the small future, the one that lived inside this room. Would the child be happy? Would she make the right choices? Would she be the kind of mother the child deserved? Or would she be the kind who tried hard and fell short and spent her evenings lying in the dark cataloguing her failures? The list was long. It was always long. It grew in the dark the way certain plants grow, silently, in directions you cannot predict, filling every available space until there is no room left for anything else. And then she turned her head and looked at the child. The child was sleeping with one arm thrown above its head, the way children do. Wide open, exposed, as if surrendering to something it trusted completely. The mouth was slightly open. The breathing was steady. The small fingers were curled loosely around nothing. Not holding, not grasping, just resting. The way fingers rest when they have forgotten that the world is a place where things need to be held. The child was not worried. Not because the child did not know there were things to worry about, Children know more than we think. They feel the tension in a room, the way they feel a change in temperature, not with their minds but with their skin, their bellies, the fine hairs on the backs of their arms. They hear the conversations we think we are having, quietly. They sense the way animals sense weather, when the adults around them are carrying something heavy. But the child was not worried, and the mother, looking at that small, open, trusting body in the moonlight, began to understand why. The child did not trust that everything would be fine. The child did not have a plan. The child did not know about the rent, or the email, or the shoes, or the review. The child trusted tonight, just this bed, this blanket, this warmth, this body beside it, that smelled like home, and sounded like home, and felt like home. The child had not solved the future. The child had not planned for every contingency. The child had simply decided, without deciding, without thinking, without the elaborate machinery of worry that adults build and maintain and polish and feed at such enormous cost, that this moment was safe, and that was enough to sleep on. Not enough for tomorrow, not enough for next week, not enough for the performance review or the electricity bill or the shoes, but enough for this breath, this pillow, this moonlight, this particular arrangement of warmth and dark and quiet that the night had offered, and that the child had accepted without question. The mother felt something shift in her chest, not a thought, something below thought, something closer to weather, a change in pressure, a loosening, the way the air changes just before rain. The mother lay still. She watched the child breathe, in, out, and without choosing to, without deciding, without any technique or method or 7-step process, she began to breathe with the child, not imitating, joining, the way two instruments playing in the same room begin to find each other's rhythm, not because one follows the other, but because rhythm is contagious, and the body knows this even when the mind does not. In, out. The worries did not disappear. They were still there, the rent, the email, the shoes, the future. They sat in the corners of the room, like coats hung on hooks, real and solid and waiting. But they were not pacing anymore. They were not speaking. They had grown quiet, not because they had been answered, but because something in the room had changed. The rhythm had changed. The breathing had changed. The mother had stopped trying to solve the night, and the night, in return, had stopped asking to be solved. The worries lay down, one by one, like guests who have been waiting for permission to rest. They did not leave. They simply closed their eyes. The rent closed its eyes. The email closed its eyes. The shoes that would need to be bought, and the review that would need to be faced, and the future that would need to be figured out. All of them, one by one, folding into the dark, the way the child had folded into sleep. Not solved, not gone, just resting, the way she was resting, the way the child had already been resting, the way everything rests, eventually, when the room is dark enough, and the breathing is slow enough, and someone, even if it is only you, is willing to say, not tonight. Tonight, we rest. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories and script, written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Perhaps you notice that your shoulders have already begun to drop, not because you told them to, not because you are following any instruction, simply because they have been listening to these stories too, and they have already begun their own quiet journey toward rest. The jaw may have softened, that place where we hold the words we did not say, the arguments we did not finish, the things we wanted to speak but swallowed instead. Let it be soft. Let the teeth part just slightly. Let the tongue rest against the floor of the mouth, heavy and still, like a stone at the bottom of a clear pool. The hands, wherever they are lying, may feel heavier than they did 2 hours ago. This is not something you are creating. This is something your body remembers when it is given time. The weight is not a burden. It is a settling. The way snow settles on a branch. The way a leaf settles on the surface of a still pond. The way everything that has been held in the air all day finally finds a place to land. Your breath has slowed. You may not have noticed, but it has. It is deeper now. Longer. The space between the inhale and the exhale has widened, like a doorway that has been opened a little further, letting more air through, letting more quiet in. You do not need to guide it. It knows where it is going. It has been making this journey since the first moment you arrived in this world, and it has not stopped once. Not during the hardest days. Not during the longest nights. It has been with you through everything, and it is with you now, faithful and unhurried, the oldest friend you have. Your eyes, if they are still open, may be growing heavy, the lids pressing gently downward, not with force, but with invitation. Let them close if they want to. There is nothing left to see tonight. The darkness behind your eyelids is not empty. It is soft and warm, and full of the same quiet that fills the room. It is the darkness of a theater after the lights go down, the darkness of a garden after sunset, the darkness that says, the show is over and it was beautiful and now you can rest. And the weight of your body, the whole of it, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, is pressing gently into whatever is holding you. The bed, the pillow, the blanket, the dark. These things are holding you the way the earth holds a river, not with effort, with gravity, with the simple, ancient agreement between weight and surface that says, you can stop now. I have you. The night outside is quiet. Whatever season it is where you are, whatever the sky looks like beyond the walls of this room, the darkness has done what darkness does. It has softened the edges of things. It has erased the distances. It has taken the sharp corners of the day, the deadlines, the arguments, the anxieties, the small and large injustices of being alive, and wrapped them in something gentler. The tree outside your window and the mountain 1,000 miles away are the same color now. The world has simplified itself, the way it does every night, into something that does not require your attention, something that only asks you to be held by it. The moon may be up, or it may not, but somewhere above the clouds, above the city lights, or the country dark, or wherever you are lying right now, the same moon that shone on the fisherman's harbor, and the potter's kiln, and the nun's garden, and the baker's window is shining. It does not know you are here. It does not need to. It simply shines, the way kindness shines, the way a good story shines, without direction, without agenda, just light, finding its way through whatever opening is available. What matters is that you are here, in this room, in this body, in this breath. The worry that followed you to bed tonight, the one we spoke about at the very beginning, the guest who arrived without knocking, has settled into the chair by the door. It is still there, but it is quiet now. Its eyes are heavy, its hands are still. It came a long way to get here, and it is tired too. You do not need to show it out. You do not need to lock the door. You only need to let the room be dark, and the blanket be warm, and the breath be slow, and the night be exactly what it is, a place where everything is allowed to rest. The worries, the plans, the questions without answers, the answers without questions, the whole beautiful, exhausting, ordinary weight of being alive. Let it rest. Let it all rest. The way the river rests when it reaches the sea, the way the candle rests when the wax is gone, the way the bamboo rests when the wind has passed. You are safe here. You have always been safe here. And the morning will come, the way it always does. Not because you planned it, not because you earned it, but because that is what mornings do. They arrive, quietly, without urgency, bringing light to rooms that had grown accustomed to the dark. But that is tomorrow, and tomorrow can wait. Tonight, there is only this breath, this warmth, this quiet, this rest, and it is enough.